The Olympus Zuiko MC 35-70mm f3.6 was first submitted for patent registration on June 17, 1976, but the lens was not revealed to the public for another 2 years. In 1978, this zoom made its first appearance at Photokina in Germany and went on sale the following year for $501. In the beginning of the 80s, this zoom was prominently featured several times on the covers of the Olympus sales brochures. In June of 1980, the American magazine Modern Photography did a complete test of this lens and concluded that this Zuiko is a top performer in the wide to telezoom category. In the early 1980s, Jack Mitchell captured the great photographer André Cortez standing on a balcony holding his Olympus camera outfitted with the 35-70mm f3.6 zoom. In 1982, someone made a short documentary of André Cortez walking around Paris and shooting with this zoom lens. I'll put a link in the description below for those of you who want to see the whole video. Olympus produced approximately 50,000 of these lenses, which is a pretty low production number, and therefore this Zuiko is a bit harder to find on the used market. The optical design of this zoom lens consists of 10 elements in 8 groups. Aperture ranges from f3.6 to f22 with click stops in between. This lens accepts filters with 55mm diameter. The diaphragm is made of 8 rounded aperture blades. Focus throw is approximately 150 degrees. This lens is in its most compact position when it's set to 70mm, and it slowly starts to expand as you zoom out, reaching full extension at 35mm. On the back, this lens has Olympus OM mount. I use OM to Sony E helicoid adapter, which allows me to focus closer when the adapter is extended, and if I need to reach infinity, I rotate it back to its normal position. This lens weighs 422 grams. The original minimum focusing distance of this lens is 80 centimeters throughout the entire zoom range, but with fully extended helicoid adapter, that distance shrinks down to only 28 centimeters. The Olympus OM Zuiko MC 35-70mm f3.6 was one of the main lenses that I used during my trip in the Southwest last year. And I'm very glad that I decided to bring it with me because I was shooting in harsh conditions with tons of wind, dust, and cold temperatures. And being able to switch between 3 different focal lengths without having to change lenses was extremely helpful. This lens also made it much easier to frame my shots because oftentimes I was in tricky places where I couldn't move forward or step backwards in order to compose. And in situations like these, zoom lenses are indispensable. And this is not just any zoom, but a professional grade lens that performs extremely well. Wide open, the Zuiko is sharp almost across the whole frame, and by f5.6 is close to perfect. The resolution at f8 and f11 is flawless, and those were the apertures that I was using to shoot all of my landscapes. The colors that come out of this multi-coated Zuiko are sublime. They are rich and vivid with excellent saturation and contrast. When it comes to distortion, things are really well controlled. At 35mm, there is some barrel distortion, which is quite common even in prime lenses at this focal length, but it's not overly exaggerated and it's super easy to fix in post. At 50mm, there is no distortion whatsoever that I was able to notice. This is a great focal length to use when straight lines are an important part of your shot. At 70mm, there is a small amount of pincushion distortion, but it's quite negligible and not much of a concern. Overall, I was very impressed at how well this lens dealt with distortion. The build quality of this zoom, as can be expected from a professional grade Zuiko, is on a very high level. This lens is made entirely out of metal with flawless construction and beautiful machine parts. Every inch of this lens speaks of very high quality. One cool feature about the zoom is that it doesn't have a rotating front element, which can be an issue with many zoom lenses, so if you want to use circular polarizers, with the Zuiko you won't have any problems. When it comes to chromatic aberrations, I was able to see a very small amount of color fringing that appears only in challenging situations. There are also some lateral chromatic aberrations, primarily visible in backlit situations, but for the most part this lens handled things beautifully and I never felt the need to remove any fringing in post. Vignetting is also present when the lens is shot wide open and mainly noticeable at 35mm, but as you stop it down, vignetting goes away and by f8 things are perfect. Perhaps the main concern for some people might be how this lens deals with flare and ghosting. As seen in the shot, this lens does flare quite a lot when you point it towards the sun, but I personally love lens flare and I'm not bothered by this issue. So at the end of the day, this is a fantastic vintage lens that can be an extremely helpful tool in your kit, especially if you're shooting in adverse environments. It is exceptionally well made, it is a joy to use, and it's a stellar performer. It's also very compact and lightweight, which makes it a great travel companion. I personally love this lens and I can highly recommend it to anyone looking for an excellent vintage zoom. And for those of you who are curious how this lens performs for video, here's a little clip I shot with it at 35mm. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time here at Vintage Optics.